Chapter 1. Sweat dripped in my eyes, but I knew if I used the half-second that it would take to brush it away, Jack would be on my ass. So I kept up my rhythm, feet moving between punches, hips and legs limber, my fists slamming the big bag as hard as I possibly could. From behind the bag I heard Jack grunt, but I didn't lose focus. He was almost as big as the bag, and I knew the grunt was one of disapproval, not from the force of my punch. I didn't think anything I threw could possibly rattle him, but I still tried. He'd been an amateur boxer since before I was born, a light heavyweight with a face that bore the scars of years in the ring, and he was a total hard-ass. Less power, Red. Breathe. And stop staring at the damn bag. You're not focusing. I absolutely hated being called Red. Only Jack could get away with calling me that. My name is Risha Reynolds. Being a redhead meant that for most of my life people went for the easy jab of Risha Red. Yeah, I also got hit with the typical ginger you don't have a soul comments, but that shit didn't bother me. Being called Red, however, made my fists clench and my blood boil. I'm not sure why the knee-jerk reaction to hearing that, but it just bothers the hell out of me. Like I said, Jack was the only one who could get away with calling me that. I punched again, landing a hit that sent the bag quivering like it was having a seizure. Felt good. Really good. Some of the anxiety that had been swirling around in my chest faded. That itchy feeling at the base of my spine that had been plaguing me since that fucker Harrison left me. I stayed light on my feet in an easy bounce and then imagined it was Harrison, the asshole in front of me, instead of the bag. Harrison, the jerk that had left me for a college roommate. Bounce again, hit again. Harrison was on his knees now. Left-right combination, and Harrison was begging for a second chance. The bag was suddenly coming at me. I took a startled step backward, dropping my hands. Jack reached around the bag, slapping his hand against the side of my head. It stung, but I was more embarrassed than hurt. Jack scowled at me from behind the bag. Whatever you're thinking about, it isn't this. I stared at Jack. What did you do that for? Because you're wasting my time and yours. If you want to pay me while you daydream, find someone else. I want to train, not stand here watching you fuck around. Okay. I threw my hands up. Sorry. It's just, I don't care what it is. Here. He reached for my hand, big fingers working quickly over the laces. I'm paid to be your personal trainer, not your personal therapist. The glove hit the floor. I held up my other hand and he went to work on that one. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm a little out of it today. A little was an understatement. It won't happen again. Damn straight. He dropped the second glove, reached out and tapped a stubby forefinger against my forehead. Whatever is up here, Red, leave it out there. You got about a quarter of an hour. Use it if you want, or hit the locker room. But I'm still charging you for it. I watched him walk away. He was right. He was always right. I'd known Jack for a little over 6 months, and even though he was a hard ass and more often than not treated me like one of the guys, he'd given me the best advice about Harrison by not saying a damn thing. And usually, like today, that advice had been a slap alongside the head and a refusal to let me wallow in self-pity, or at least not wallow on his time, even if it was my dime. The day was a wash as far as training went. I scooped up the gloves and my water bottle and headed to the locker room. From across the ring that dominated the center of the room, I caught Jack's eye and the slow shake of his head. I could read him from here, wasting time again. So I detoured, dropped the gloves and bottle, and climbed onto the treadmill. I'd walk out the last of my session here, maybe redeem myself a little. Punched in a short program and started walking. But this was worse than the bag. There was nothing to distract me from myself. I tried watching the guys in the ring and focusing on their motions. The cute guy with the black hair was sparring with someone new, and for a minute I watched them circle and dance, jab and weave. But even that wasn't enough to hold my attention. It drifted again. Back to Harrison. You need to get your head on straight, Risha. Jack was right. To let what happened with Harrison still bother me after all these months was crazy. But he'd been the guy I thought was the love of my life, my soulmate, the man I was going to marry. And I thought he felt the same way about me. That is, until he told me he thought we should see other people. And then topped that off by casually mentioning he was dating my old college roommate. Called it quits. The timer buzzed on the treadmill and I stepped off. The cute guy was gone. from the ring, and Jack had already started training with his next client. Everyone was busy getting on with their lives. I gathered up my gear and headed to the locker room. Jack was right, I needed to move on already. I think getting away is a good idea, but why the middle of nowhere? Can't you get Harrison out of your system at a spa or a resort? Someplace with indoor plumbing. My best friend Maggie was curled on my couch sipping a Cosmo. She just binge-watched an entire season of Sex and the City, and she was channeling her inner Carrie Bradshaw. But it suited her personality. She's a girly girl, through and through, and a complete opposite of me. Maybe that's why we've been friends for so long. I like to hike and camp, you know that. I plopped down in the chair opposite her. It's only for a couple days. Nothing's going to happen to me other than bug bites and maybe a case of poison ivy. I took a sip of my beer. I'm just tired of everything that reminds me of Harrison. I'm tired of. I waved my hand in the vague direction of pretty much everything in sight. We'd shared this apartment, and while I'd gotten rid of most of his personal belongings, the things we'd bought together, like the couch I no longer sat on, were silent reminders of him, of us, of what was no more. I need a vacation, and it's been ages since I've gone camping. I miss being out in the woods. And hey, it's a two-person tent if you want to come along. Maggie was already shaking her head. Oh hell no. Not me. I'm a city girl. And you know it. I'm lost if there's anything other than concrete beneath my feet. If I go longer than a few days without retail therapy, I go into shock. You know this. And that's exactly why you need a 2-bedroom apartment. Just so you have enough room for your shoes. And that's why I'm a very happy girl. She laughed. Retail therapy works every time. Well, I'm glad you found your bliss. Mine is outside, alone with nothing but nature and myself. Maggie's laugh faded. Yeah, about that. Her expression suddenly changed, and I knew where this conversation was headed. So why can't you think here? Why not just hole up with a gallon of Ben and Jerry's and a bunch of movies? Because there's email and phones and clients with deadlines and interruptions and reminders around every corner and in every drawer and in every closet. Basically, I lived in a haunted apartment with my ex as the resident ghost. But why the need to live amongst the wild? Can't you just unplug everything and disconnect from the world for a bit? Even I can do that. Not the same, Maggie. Do you want another Cosmo? It's hard to derail Maggie when she gets like this. But she wasn't taking the bait. I went and got another beer, bracing myself for what was coming next. She waited until I was back in my chair before she started up again. Rish, I've said this before. You spend too much time alone. You work from home, you order groceries online, have takeout delivered. Who do you actually see besides me? Jack at the gym. I wanted to say the other guys at the gym, but I had to admit, even to myself, I really didn't even know their names. Cleo. Sounded lame even to my ears. Cleo. Rish, you've never even met most of your clients. For all you know, Hannah in Canada might be a middle-aged man in Florida. You don't know these people other than as an email address or Skype name. That's unfair. It's not like that, and you know it. This isn't online dating. This is my business. I'm a ghostwriter. It's not like I have to know my clients personally. They send me an outline, I complete the work, and they pay me. I don't exactly have to be their friend. But I did have to admit, I had doubts sometimes about who really was on the other end of the email address. As a ghostwriter, all of my business took place via the internet, so I would never really know. But quite honestly, I didn't care. I kept my head down and did the work. My point, Rish, is you're alone. A lot. And I don't know that it's a good idea for you go off and be even more alone than you already are. This is different. How so? Alone is alone, either here or in the middle of nowhere. You're still alone. I asked if you wanted to come with me, remember? I figured that would shut her up. Besides, I'm my own best company. I have an active imagination. And hey, there are a whole lot of people living in my head. They'll keep me company. I gave her my best smile, but she wasn't buying it. That's another thing. You write strange stories about werewolves, vampires, things that go bump in the night. You asked if you could duct tape me to a chair just last week to see if I could escape. She shook her head and I laughed. I'd asked her to do that as research, and she'd flat out refused to be my guinea pig. I couldn't say I blamed her. It's just that I worry about you. Yeah, I know. I worry about me too sometimes. But this really is different. There's something special that happens in the deep woods. Something elemental. I always feel as though I belong out there somehow. Like I'm going home. Shrug. Sounds weird to you, but it's my bliss being out there. I miss it. Maggie rolled her eyes, but I could tell that I was getting through to her. Well, you were always the hippie chick. She grinned at me over the edge of her glass. I suppose running naked through the woods would do you some good. At least you'll get rid of that indoor pallor. Get some sun. You never do see the sun, do you? With the vampire hours you keep. It was my turn to roll my eyes. I'm not a vampire, I work from home. And I don't tan, you know that. Red hair? I ran my hand through my hair, fanning the strands over my shoulders. Freckles, all of it. I'm doomed to be pale, regardless of my work schedule. All this flaming red hair, which only flamed brighter as I got older, not dimming as my mother had said it would, as she tried in vain to console me, while I cried over its brash color. Red hair is really difficult to manage, which meant that I wasn't exactly a popular kid. It had taken years to finally come to terms that I would always stand out in the crowd, and through it all somehow I learned to love the hair and freckles that made me different. Maggie sighed, a sound of resignation. I hoped we'd come to the point, just like we did every time we had a variation of this conversation where she just gave up. I didn't like the confrontation, and this was as confrontational as we ever got. So when are you going off to play Forest Fairy? This weekend, I think. If I can get caught up on work, I can take off Thursday and Friday and be back Sunday night. I'm only going up to the hot springs at Big River. Oh, see? You'll be skinny dipping too. I've heard all about the sort of things that go on up at those secluded hot springs. Maggie giggled, finishing her Cosmo. Too bad you don't have someone to take along. She winced. I'm sorry. I mean some random guy you just met, for a wild weekend. Fling in your two-person tent. Maybe you'll meet your hippie soulmate up there. Heaven knows you'd have more in common with the guys who hang out up there than the juice pigs at the gym. No wild weekend flings. I want to meditate, do some yoga, sit in the springs, and just think. Maggie leaned forward, setting her glass on the coffee table, her smile fading. You just can't do things like everyone else, can you? Apparently, she hadn't quite given up yet. It's the same thing with the boxing. Why not a membership at a regular gym? Instead you go to the extreme, hanging out with a bunch of guys who like to beat the shit out of one another. And still no dates. I rolled my eyes, probably for the 10th time in the last hour. We'd had this conversation before, too. I didn't join the club looking for a date, Maggie. I wanted to get in shape. You can get in shape at a better place than a fight club, Risha. It's not a fight club. Maggie was already holding up her hands in mock protest, but she was smiling. I know. Boxing is a great workout, great for cardio, gets you strong. I've heard the sales pitch before. She laughed as she stood up and grabbed her purse, then leaned over and kissed my cheek. Listen, Rish, you do what you need to do. You've never done the conventional thing, so if heading into the woods and bending yourself into a pretzel is what you need, then go for it. Personally, I think a weekend at Bloomingdale's would be a great way to forget an ex, especially if you happen to still have one of his credit cards. But then again, we never do see things the same way. Do we? I guess not, I replied with a smile. Maggie drove me crazy at times, but I know she always has my best interests at heart. Have fun, she said, hugging me. Everything is going to be okay. Harrison was a jerk. You know you're better off without him. So go and zen out until you feel better. I love you, girl. I love you too, Maggie. After Maggie left, I slumped back into my chair, avoiding the couch, shifting around until I got comfortable. Maggie had known me since grade school. We'd seen each other through boyfriends in college, jobs, and first apartments. She knew me better than anyone, even if it was clear she didn't understand me. But she was right. I wasn't conventional, never had been. And that was fine with me. Chapter 2. I was headed to Big River, which ran down the backside of Black Wolf Mountain. Most of Black Wolf and the mountains around it were part of the Seven Mountains State Park, but the ridge that ran north along the backside of Black Wolf belonged to a huge tract of land over several hundred acres that stretched all the way to the Canadian border, which everyone assumed belonged to a private party. It was crisscrossed with disused logging roads, some that ran up to the parkland, Most were posted with no trespassing signs, blocked off with chains and padlocks, and over the years small trees had sprouted, further blending the roads back into the surrounding forest. There were rumors the land had belonged to a recluse, or currently belonged to a cult, or aliens landed there frequently. It all depended on whom you talked to and on what day and on how much the storyteller had to drink, according to local lore, and then translated through stories that got passed around among hikers who used the springs. There had been sightings of big animals, wolves, mountain lions, bears, bigger than any ever sighted in the park. Most of those stories were told around the campfire, along with a bottle or three of wine or something stronger shared with novice hikers coming up the mountain for the first time. The logging road that ran up the back of the mountain wasn't on parkland, and there hadn't been any logging in the area for decades. It had always been rough, but this year there had been torrential rains and the road turned from washboard to rutted to washed out far below where the trail to the hot springs began. So I parked my car, dragged out my gear, and locked up. Always worried I'd come back to find the car gone, but in all the years I'd been coming here it was always right where I left it. The only problem I'd ever heard about was when a bear had attacked a friend's ancient Subaru to get after some food that had been left on the dashboard. He'd come back from a week in the woods to find the roof torn off the car, and the food long gone. I stopped to look around, breathing in the cool air. I closed my eyes and smiled. It felt like the first time I'd smiled in a long time, or at least the first time in a long time the smile felt authentic, not forced for a client on Skype or a cashier at the market or a cab driver. It occurred to me that there might be more to think about on this weekend besides Harrison. Maybe it was time to think about the bigger picture rather than just the missing piece to the puzzle. After hiking halfway up the mountain to the turnoff to the springs, I was sweating, breathing hard, and very glad I'd only brought enough in my pack for a long weekend. The idea of setting up camp, kicking back in one of the hot springs as the sun went down, and then having a simple dinner by the fire with some wine was looking more and more enticing. I dropped my pack for a minute, loving that fleeting sense of weightlessness that happened after shedding all that weight. I stretched my arms and rolled my shoulders. This was going to be a great weekend. I would be one with nature, live in the moment, stop dwelling in the past. Maybe I'd come home with my own tall tale from the forest, my own lore to add to that of my camping friends. The forest ahead of me was deep dark green. I always loved this part. Stepping off the road, out of the sunshine, and into the cool darkness of the woods. It was magical, like stepping into a fairy tale. I thought of Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and the other stories I'd read as a child. If I could build a house anywhere in the world, it would be here on the edge of the unknown, just over the line from civilization. Not so far over that I'd have to give up plumbing and shaving my legs, but just enough to ease out of the rat race. So I shouldered my pack and took one last look back down the road. There was no one in sight, no other cars, no sounds of traffic, nothing but a lone hawk circling overhead. I felt like I was alone in the world, and that was fine with me. Out of habit, I dug my phone out of my pocket. I had it out and checking for messages before I remembered there was no service up here. Chided myself for bringing along this last bit of technology. I held it for a minute and considered flinging it off the edge of the mountain, but I wasn't quite ready to divest myself of all the trappings of civilization. I shut it off and jammed it into my pocket. The woods were cool, the path covered in pine needles. I was on level ground for the next couple miles, and then I'd find a gentle descent to Big River and the springs. My steps were muffled, almost soundless. I could already feel the tension and anxiety of the past months ebbing out of my body. I was pretty sure by the time I reached the springs, got my little camp set up, and made dinner, I'd be exhausted in a good way. A soak in the hot springs and a little wine, and I'd be too tired in body and mind to obsess about Harrison. And tomorrow maybe a sunrise session of yoga, a nice breakfast, and then I'd sit and think. The pines here grew so close together they almost touched overhead. The path wound in and out of shafts of sunlight, and for a time I was conscious of the difference in warmth against my skin, then the chill as I stepped out of the light. My senses seemed heightened, every detail popping out at me. I started to notice my footfalls, the shushing sound my boots made, the wind above me. Was in my zone, living in the moment. This was going to be a great weekend. Something was off though. The hair on my arm stood on end. I stopped, thinking there was someone on the path ahead of me or behind me, or in the woods. I listened carefully, but the only things I heard were the wind, a few birds in the trees. Maybe I wasn't as relaxed as I thought I was. I did a slow circle, but I didn't see anyone. A bird sang somewhere close by. Another answered. The forest seemed just as it always did, filled with its usual flecks of color. I shook my head, laughing at myself. Maybe I'd turned into a city girl buffered by traffic noises, city sounds, and now freaked out by a little silence. But standing in the middle of the path wasn't going to get me to those hot springs. With one last look back down the path toward the road, I turned around and stopped dead in my tracks. The wolf stood in the middle of the path. It was big, really big, but also amazingly beautiful. It stared at me and I was mesmerized, unable to look away. And then I panicked. Staring at them was a sign of dominance or aggression or something. But I'd be damned if I was going to take my eyes off the wolf. But it didn't seem vicious. Like I would know what a vicious wolf looked like. It looked more curious than anything, standing in the path with its head tipped to the side, dark eyes on mine, as if it were analyzing me. And it was stunningly beautiful, dark fur tipped with silver, big eyes. I stared at him, and he stared back, and for a moment I had the sensation of having my mind read or my soul searched, or the living daylight scared out of me. Hey boy, good boy. Oh my God, my heart was beating wildly in my chest. It tipped its head further. Progress, I babbled on. Oh yeah, good boy. The wolf took a step forward, pink tongue showing in a doggy grin. I took a step back. No one's going to believe this. Oh shit. Take a picture. Slowly. I eased my phone out of my pocket, eyes never leaving the wolf. I turned on the phone, dropped my eyes from the wolf for the split second it took to take the picture, then looked up. The wolf whined, a low soft sound. But what did that mean? Was it camera shy? Had I upset it? Reflexively I clicked off another couple of pictures. The wolf whined again, and I let my arm fall to my side as it took another step forward. Every cell in my body told me to run, but I held my ground. Okay, I'm done. No more pictures. Good boy. The wolf stopped, ears pricked forward. Then it advanced another step. I held up my hands. Whoa, stop. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Please stop. My voice came out in a desperate whisper. The wolf stopped, eyes still locked with mine. They were blue like a husky dog. Maybe that's what he was, just someone's pet off its leash. I let out a sigh of sorts. Would it be too much to ask for you to sit? Behind it, the tail started to wave back and forth in slow motion. And then, to my amazement, it sat down in the middle of the path. So it was someone's pet. Hello. I spun around. A man was walking toward me, wearing a park ranger uniform. Relief washed through me, and along with a wave of giggles. This must be the ranger's dog. Boy, am I glad to see you. Your dog. I was already pointing and I turned back to the wolf. But the path was empty. No dog or wolf or anything else was visible in the shifting patterns of light and dark. My giggles faded away. Sorry, ma'am. Did you say dog? His friendly expression took on a hint of concern. I don't have a dog. None of us do. There was a dog. I was still pointing to where the animal had been. Or a wolf. The ranger walked past me, then crouched down at the spot where the canine had been. There's tracks here, ma'am, but I can't really say what made them. Hard to tell when it comes to this stuff. He brushed his hand over the spot, scooping up a handful of pine needles. I watched as he lifted them to his nose and inhaled. His face took on a strained expression, a look briefly crossing his face, blotting out the friendly neighborhood ranger concern. I'd have to say it was a look of recognition, followed by one of pure hatred. But when he tossed away the needles and stood, all that was gone. I blinked, not sure what I'd seen, replaced by a bland expression, a non-committal smile. Maybe I was still spooked by the phantom wolf, or the light and shadows were playing tricks. He smiled down at me. It was probably just a coyote chasing a rabbit. The altitude, the light, the isolation. If you're not used to being out in the woods, it can play tricks on you. I frowned. It was a wolf? Or a big dog? I'm not a novice. I've been up here before. He cut me off. We haven't had a wolf sighting in the park in decades. There was something programmed about his response, dismissive in a way I didn't like. It felt as though the guy was hiding something, Okay. Then it was a coyote. I shifted my pack, settling it on my shoulders. I should get going then. I've got a way to go before I set up camp. You're headed to the springs then. He stepped to the side of the path. Then, I'll let you get on your way. Don't wander off the path. Wouldn't want you getting lost. He touched the brim of his hat, and I stepped past him. Thanks. I walked down the path looking down at the spot where Wolf had been. If there had been any sign of paw prints, they were obliterated now. Somehow the disturbed pine needles looked like a broken window in a church. Wanted to put it all back on order. But I walked on. I'd only gone a couple yards when I had the urge to turn around to see if the ranger was walking away. But I knew he wasn't, and I knew when I turned, which I did, I'd find him watching me. And he was. He waved again, still smiling. When he finally turned away and headed back down the path, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Some of my excitement had dimmed after the encounter with the wolf and the ranger. Something tugged at my mind about the whole thing. Something was off. That I should have noticed. It wasn't until I was almost to the springs that it dawned on me. He hadn't been wearing a name badge. And he hadn't told me his name. Chapter 4. The sun was almost down by the time we reached my little campsite, if an abandoned tent and a lone pack could be called a campsite. It was much darker. Beneath the canopy of trees, the pines added a green bulk that seemed to soak up the last of the sunlight. We all had flashlights, and Colt and Jericho made a complete circle of the area. I stood in the middle, a little bemused. I'd never seen anyone do that before, except in rattlesnake country. But we didn't have rattlesnakes here. I chalked it up to idiosyncratic camper superstitions. Nice tent. You want some help setting it up? Colt dropped his pack beside the pile of nylon and fiberglass, picking up the pieces I'd left in a heap. Help yourself. It was what drove me down to the springs. I'd given up trying to puzzle it out. I picked up my pack, ferreting out matches in my fire starter kit. I'll get the fire going. But Jericho already had a tiny flame cradled in a bunch of pine needles, and I watched as he tenderly set it among a pile of tinder, carefully feeding it small twigs, the flame growing quickly. He glanced up, catching my gaze, grinning at me over the flickering flames. I got a merit badge in camping when I was a kid. I see. I dropped the stuff back into my pack. Is there anything you guys can't do? Not if it involves living off the land. Colt stepped away from the tent. It seemed like it had materialized out of nowhere. We've been roughing it in some way since we were kids. Both of us grew up near here, spent most of our time messing around in the woods or getting into trouble. Jericho added a larger branch to the fire. The flames licked around it, turning blue and yellow. Jericho dropped to the ground, leaning his back against the log. He gave me an encouraging smile. Hell, he gave me a smile that could have lit a fire without matches. But I stood for a moment, debating where to sit. Suddenly I was shy, like I was on a blind date, not sitting around the fire with two guys I just had sex with in the hot springs. Two guys who certainly had an effect on me and my libido. I perched primly on the log. I'll round up some more firewood. I just caught a glimpse of Colt as he disappeared silently into the woods. Jericho tugged his pack closer, pulling out a thermos. After a minute he handed me a metal cup. Here. Broad enough for all of us. I took an experimental sniff, then a sip. It was bourbon, I thought. Whatever it was, I was pretty sure it was the strongest thing I'd ever tasted. Jericho stretched his legs out toward the fire. We watched the flames for a minute. Somewhere in the woods a night bird called, its mate answering. Then it went still, and the only sounds were that of the crackling fire. Jericho stretched again, looking up at me over his shoulder. What's your game, Red? You're a good girl. You're not someone who sleeps around. So why the sudden menage in the hot springs? Feel like taking a walk on the wild side. The fire crackled, sparks rising against the backdrop of the dark trees above. That was the deeper black of the sky, brilliant stars, pinpricks in the dark. The fire caught Jericho's eyes, and for a startling moment I swore they glinted red. I blinked and blinked again, but the moment was gone. I'm not. I shifted on the log, took another sip of bourbon. Burned like proverbial fire. I swallowed hard, tried not to cough, and wasn't entirely successful. The last thing I wanted to look like was a lightweight in front of these guys. There was something about them that brought out my Competitive edge among other feelings or urges or desires. I shrug, trying for nonchalance. Like this is normal for me. Sex in the afternoon. Drinking the hard stuff at night. Let's say I stepped out of my life for the weekend. I looked down at Jericho, but he was staring into the fire, for which I was profoundly grateful. I wasn't sure I could stand that piercing gaze at the moment. I needed a change, needed to do some thinking. I'm all for getting away from it all, looking inward, doing a bit of soul searching. And for you, if that means a weekend fling, so be it. He took a swallow of his drink. Anything I can do to help you? He glanced behind me. I turned to see Colt materialize from the forest carrying an armful of firewood. Anything we can do to help? Just let us know. Help who? Colt dropped the wood, grabbed a branch and added it to the fire. Red. She's on a voyage of self-discovery. I told her we're here for her. Colt crouched in the glow of the fire, poking it with a stick. The fire roared briefly, then settled back. I caught the smile on his face and was eternally grateful for the darkness around us, and that if either of them noticed my blush, they'd think it was a rosy glow from the fire or the fire of the bourbon. Both of them had already gone a long way to helping me do whatever it was I'd come here to do. I don't want to pry, but there must have been something that prompted this weekend away. Care to share? I took another sip of bourbon. It was kind of growing on me, the warmth sliding through my body. The last little bit of shyness melted away. There was no reason not to tell these guys the reasons I was here. Chances were pretty good I'd never see them after this weekend. Might as well get the truth out there, get it out of my system. A couple of months ago, my boyfriend, my fiancé, actually cheated on me. He'd started dating my college roommate. I took another shot of liquid courage. He wanted an open relationship. I wanted nothing to do with him. So you took to the wilderness to clear your head? Colt nodded. Sounds like a good plan. Hard to think when you're surrounded by reminders of the guy. Exactly. I waved my arm, intending to point at Colt, but managed only to slosh a bit of bourbon on the ground. Jericho reached up, gently taking the cup out of my hand. Maybe you've had enough for now. Oh, sorry. I've never been good at holding my liquor. The warmth in me was making the world a little fuzzy around the edges. It was a pleasant fuzziness. And I had some wine before. Jericho laughed, a nice sound. I could get used to that sound. It's okay. You just do what you need to. We'll watch out for the big bad wolf, make sure you're safe while you sort out your life. Oh hey, that reminds me. Did you guys see a wolf today? A big black wolf. Don't know if it was bad. I reached behind the log, digging in my pack for my phone. Here. I took pictures. I flipped open the phone, scrolling to the shots of the wolf on the path. I leaned forward and held it out so the guys could see it. See. I flipped through the photos. The first one was clear. The rest wouldn't win me any awards. He sat when I asked him to, but I didn't get a picture of that. I thought he might have been the ranger's dog, but the guy said. I got the feeling no one was listening to me. I glanced at Colt, then to Jericho. Neither were looking at me or the phone. They were looking at each other, and the look they exchanged was one I couldn't miss, even in my happy state. Something was wrong, very wrong. You did see it, right? I slumped on the log, then slid down onto the ground between Jericho and Colt. I think the ranger thought I was crazy. Ranger. Jericho's voice had an edge to it. What ranger? Colt coughed, then turned away as he fumbled for something. Yeah, Jericho. There was a ranger. His voice was muffled. I turned to Colt. Were you on the path ahead of me? You must have been if you saw him and then showed up at the springs when you did. Or did you say you came from the other way? Wine, bourbon, and the afterglow of sex had muddled my recollection of what he'd said when we first met. Yeah, I saw the wolf. Colt sat up, absently poking the fire. I saw the ranger. Jericho tensed beside me, leaning forward to look past me at Colt. Were you going to tell me? Or just wait till he showed up here? What the hell were you thinking? Or you weren't thinking, were you? I sat perfectly still between the two of them, confused, the fuzzy feeling fading. The air was charged with tension, everything changing. I wasn't exactly scared, but I was no longer drifting in a comforting haze of alcohol and sex. What did I say? Did I say something wrong? The tension held for a moment, then shifted. Whatever was going on between them they'd let it go at least a little. Jericho finally stood up, making a point of stretching, even though I knew he was far from relaxed. You're fine, Red. This is between Colt and me. Nothing to do with you. You're not going to fight or anything, are you? Jericho moved around the fire, heading for the trees. No, just guys being guys. No fighting. I'm going for more firewood. I relaxed bit by bit. Maybe in my muddled state I'd misunderstood whatever had just happened. So you did see the wolf? Big black blue eyes? I looked into Colt's blue eyes at his dark hair. It had dried now and it curled around his shoulders. In the light of the fire it looked tipped with deep red. But in the sun, would it be tipped with silver? Colt turned to me. Big black wolf. Yeah, I think I've seen him before. I stared at him, almost unable to look away. Blue eyes, black hair. You've heard the stories, Red? The legend of Black Wolf Mountain. The rest of it, the territory to the north, all the wild stories. I nodded, not looking away, unable to even if I wanted. But I didn't want to look away. Felt like I could look into those eyes for a long time, forever. If only. So do you believe them, the stories you heard around the campfire? Colt reached out, winding a strand of hair through his finger, tugging lightly. You know, I could really fall in love with this hair. Obsessed much? Yeah, pretty much. Is that a problem? I shook my head, leaning toward Colt, following my strand of hair. His gaze slid down to my lips, a look so sexy I almost felt the caress of him against me. Swoon was never a word I'd have used to describe how I felt with a guy. Before this, I closed my eyes, swooning. But his words tugged at me and I stopped leaning forward, stopped swooning. He tugged on my hair, but I pulled back, the strand held taut between us. I opened my eyes. Wait. Stop distracting me. You asked if I believed in the stories. What stories? Red. Risha. There's something you should probably know about me and Jericho. Something that might change how you think about us. Oh, okay. Married? Girlfriends? I thought we covered all that. He let go of my hair, watching it as it fell against my shoulder. It's not what you think. None of that. The instant his eyes met mine, I knew it, in my heart, in my soul, in every cell in my body. I went cold, then hot, then felt that swooning feeling again. Only it was more sickening than sexy this time around. You're the wolf. He didn't answer, didn't have to. It was written clear on his face. My heart took off like a racehorse out of the gate, and I dug my fingers into the sandy dirt under my hands. This was worse than a girlfriend or a wife. Oh my fucking God. It's okay, Red. Really. I'm not the big bad wolf of legend. Neither is Jericho. That snapped me out of wherever my head had gone. Jericho? He's a thing. Like you. Don't say it like that. We're not things. He actually sounded hurt, and I actually felt bad for. What? Insulting his heritage? Then what are you? Right now I'm just a guy. Like I was before at the Springs. Just a guy. Sitting around the fire, enjoying your company. Then who or what were you before? On the trail. That was also me. Only in wolf form. We call ourselves shifters. We can change shape. And in our case it's from human to wolf and back. Are you serious? This sounds crazy. I could barely breathe, my head swirling. In colors of black and gray, and I felt as though I might almost pass out. I looked closely at Colt, at the face of the man who I'd had sex with just a few hours earlier. I thought having sex with a stranger was way outside my comfort zone, but what he just told me pretty much blew all that right out of the water. My instincts kicked in and I felt just like I did on the path. The urge to run was almost overwhelming. He was either telling the truth or he was completely and absolutely insane. At the moment either or both was just as chilling to think about. But this wasn't the wolf. Or it was. But it was also Colt. And I happened to like Colt. I liked Colt very much. It was obvious the dynamic between us had changed. The light-hearted banter was gone. The sexual tension was still there, but it was overlaid with something a lot like fear. Okay, so let's say I can suspend disbelief long enough. You're a wolf in human clothing. He cracked half a smile. You could say that. It's a little more complicated. There's a history with Jericho and me, and a backstory that's a bit long in the tooth. His smile widened. Sorry. Couldn't resist the pun. I managed something of a smile, I think. I wasn't sure. Most of me felt numb. Why were you a wolf when I saw you? I wasn't sure who you were yet, friend or foe. When I'm in wolf form I see things differently. Literally. My senses are heightened: smell, hearing, sight. I get a better view of who I'm looking at. A more accurate view in most cases. Some of the tension seeped out of me, despite hearing Colt explain he was a wolf. Listening to him, hearing his voice, the calm way he was talking to me, somehow made it seem okay. Maybe even believable. Somehow, some way. You're hypnotizing me, aren't you? I made the effort to shift my gaze to the fire. That's a thing you can do, right? I watch television, you know. I know how this works. He laughed softly. Red, if I was into mind control, my life would be a whole hell of a lot easier. And television usually gets it wrong. Vampires don't. Sparkle. Shifters don't use mind control. At least not all the time. He stretched his arms over his head. Believe me, life as a shifter isn't easy. This has been one of the better days of late. Oh, I wasn't sure if that included me or something else. My mind was spinning, too many questions piling up, fighting to be the first one asked. But before I could pick the front runner, Colt stood up. Something's wrong. Jericho should be back by now. Bewildered, I scrambled to my feet, tripping over the little pile of firewood. Colt was already on the other side of the fire, heading toward the gap where Jericho had gone. What do I do? Stay here. Colt turned back, face set in rigid lines. For a moment the wolf played over his face, the eyes glowing in the light of the fire, his hair catching the slight breeze. But what? A howl cut through the soft night air. The sound chilled me to the bone. Stepped backward, tripped over the big log, landing hard on my ass. The wind knocked out of me. Colt stopped, half turned toward me, half turned toward the forest. If he saw what was coming out of the forest almost on top of him, he never flinched. All I saw was a ball of gray fur wrapped around what looked like a big rag doll. I screamed and struggled to sit up, to catch my breath, to get my bearings. For a moment everything was obscured by the fire, the figures blurred, red-tinged. I finally got to my feet, and what I saw wasn't any less chilling from that vantage point. The figures separated, the rag doll taking the shape of the nameless ranger. The gray fur resolved into another wolf. From the way Colt swung around, teeth bared at the ranger, eyes narrowed, I knew this wolf wasn't just any wolf. This was Jericho. The ranger and Jericho faced off briefly on either side of the fire. Jericho snarled, exposing brilliant white fangs, advancing stiff-legged around the flames. The ranger crouched, moving in the opposite direction, keeping the fire between them. There were rips and tears in his khaki uniform, some of them edged with blood. Colt looked strangely hesitant, poised halfway between Jericho, the ranger, and me. I realized a split second too late that the ranger and I were on a collision. Of course, he realized it a split second before I did. I went left, he went right, but I couldn't avoid him. He slung an arm around my neck, pulling me against him. He smelled awful, not just of dirt and sweat, but of something rotten. Wondered vaguely if he was some kind of shifter as well. But it was getting hard to breathe, and the world was going gray and fuzzy. I struggled, but the man was much stronger than I was. Struggling just got harder and harder, so finally I gave up, concentrating on breathing. And even that was getting harder by the second. Let her go, Weatherly. She's not the one you came for. Yeah, but she's the one I've got. Ranger Weatherly jerked me upright so hard my feet left the ground. That just made everything worse, made breathing next to impossible. I went limp, not by choice but because I had no choice. Back off. And call off your dog, Colt. You know what I want, why I'm here. And if I can't have you, then I'll take this one. You know I can snap her neck in a heartbeat. Something cold tickled the skin below my jaw. Colt's eyes narrowed and Jericho whined. I guess Weatherly had added a knife to the mix to back up his promise to break my neck. The world was really going black now, the ranger's voice getting faint. My head fell to the side, and through half-closed eyes I saw Colt on the other side of the fire. Jericho stood by his side. Their expressions were identical. Anger mixed with fear, mixed with confusion. Those weren't looks that instilled confidence in me. But I couldn't blame them, didn't blame them. I tried to tell them that, tried to talk, tried to send telepathic messages. I was leaving the conscious world. And the last thing I wanted them to feel was responsible. Silly thought. Chapter 5. I jerked awake. My neck hurt and I tried to lie still until the zings of pain in my body stopped, not sure what, if anything, was broken. I tried to open my eyes, then realized they were open but I couldn't see. For a really long, horrible moment I thought I died and this was purgatory that I was stuck in. A place where I was unable to see or hear or speak. But then I realized I wouldn't have this much pain if I were dead. Slowly bits and pieces came back. To me, the fire of Colt and Jericho sex, the ranger. Weatherly. It occurred to me that I finally knew his name. I was on something more or less soft and something was stuck in my mouth. So I was blindfolded, gagged and lying on a smelly mattress. And I was alive. Hey, you're awake. The voice was close, sounding absurdly happy about the fact. I jerked again. Another wave of pain shooting down my arms. My hands were tied behind my back, but I could wiggle my fingers. They worked. The pain meant I was alive and that even if I was injured I wasn't paralyzed. It might have been a small thing, but I was suddenly very happy to feel pain. But why Weatherly had me, and what he intended to do, that I wasn't very happy about. Let's get better acquainted. Hands touched me, my face, pulling my hair hard enough to make my eyes water. I grunted. I was pretty much over reveling in pain now. All I wanted was to see and to be able to sit up. The blindfold came off. I looked up at Weatherly. I wanted to laugh, which was impossible with the gag. Weatherly looked far worse for wear than I felt. Whatever happened before they tumbled into the clearing, Jericho had gotten in few good scratches and bites. Weatherly's uniform was shredded in places, the edges caked with dried blood, torn skin visible beneath a few of the bigger tears. And if he smelled bad before, he smelled even worse now. Sweat, old and new, dirt and blood. And I sensed the sharp tang of fear on him. Not a pleasant combination. But what the hell did he have to be afraid of? I was the one tied up and gagged, not him. Weatherly wrenched the gag out of my mouth, pulling my hair again, my scalp aching. I glared up at him, mustering up as much bravado as I could. Listen, Weatherly, I don't know what your game is, but I'm pretty sure Colt and Jericho aren't going to just let you take me. They're probably on their way. Here right now. At least I hoped they were. How much loyalty did an almost stranger garner? I'm sure they are. And that's just fine by me. The more the merrier. What do you want with me? The whole disjointed conversation by the fire, the part about Jericho and Colt, all that could wait. I wanted to know what my part in this was. And I wanted him talking so I could find a way to get my hands free or get him to untie me. I wanted to take a swing at him so bad I could taste it. I don't want you, or I didn't, until I saw you on the path. But then that damn wolf showed up. He loomed over me for a minute, then must have decided it was awkward, bending over to glare at me. Grabbing my shoulders, he yanked me upright. I had no balance, wavered from side to side, and then fell backward, my head hitting the wall. I closed my eyes as a new pain added itself to the mix. The wolf showed up. I heard a footstep and opened an eye, watching as Weatherly turned, pacing across the small room. Gave me a chance to look around. There wasn't much to see. The room was bare, just the mattress I was sitting on, a few chairs sitting at random angles, a table shoved in the corner. All in all, not someone's permanent residence. Probably a deserted rental cabin from the 50s, long forgotten, long abandoned. Perfect place to keep a hostage. The wolf showed up. The wolf I was after, one of them anyway. So why bother with me? Weatherly paced a few steps toward the door, twitching open the tattered curtain that hung on the window. He stared out into whatever was out there. Whatever he could see in the dark. Then it struck me. He was a wolf shifter. He could see in the dark just like Colt and Jericho. And that meant he could change just like they could. And with him as a wolf I didn't stand a chance. I wiggled my hands, turning my wrists. The rope bit into my skin, burned like hell. But I thought there was some play in them. Maybe it was my imagination. But it was the only thing I had to hold on to right now. Weatherly moved to another window, looked out, then turned back to me. Froze, my wrists screaming in pain. My shoulders rotated at some unnatural angle. Something changed in the way he looked at me, something darker crossing his features. You were going to be collateral damage at first. Get you out of the way. Nasty hiking accident. Didn't matter if you knew what any of this meant. You just needed to go away. But then you hooked up with those two. How the hell did that happen? I tracked them forever, and there's never been a woman. But now there's you. I'd be happy to just bow out right now.
No harm, no foul.
Not so fast. Plans change. He crossed the little room, almost standing on my feet. I can use you. He grabbed me again, pulling me upright. Those guys used you. I can use you, too. I was pretty sure his idea of use wasn't going to be anywhere as fun as what happened with Colt and Jericho. I struggled, trying to disguise my attempts at freedom with frantic wiggling. Something loosened in the ropes around my wrists, one loop slipping. Weatherly apparently wasn't very good at knot tying. Use me how? Did I really want to know? I can make you one of us like me. He leered at me, baring his teeth. They were the same brilliant white as Colt's and Jericho's, a little longer than normal, far sharper than any human teeth should be. I jerked back, trying to get away from him. Bite you, mark you, make you mine. You'll be mated to me, and I can have what they have. Whatever he was saying was lost on me. I'd stopped paying attention after the mention of bite. I didn't want to be bitten, not by Weatherly or anyone else. My heart galloped wildly in my chest, and I struggled not to go into full-blown panic mode. Another loop of rope fell away, and for a surprised second I felt hope that I may actually stand a chance of getting away. Then I let fear replace exhilaration. It wasn't hard. I heard Jack's voice in my head telling me to wait, look for my opening, to keep my eyes open, that I just needed to focus, to be patient. But Weatherly had other ideas. He pulled me against him, his big hand grabbing my hair. For an instant I wished I'd chopped all this hair off, given myself a buzz cut. That way men wouldn't be able to yank me around by it. He pulled my head back, eyes drifting from my face to my neck. He smiled, if that's what it could be called. My body had gone numb, limp, partly by design, mostly out of my control. The only thing really moving was my heart, thumping along at a dizzying pace. It's not going to hurt. He was focused on my throat, his arms slackening against my back. Just stay cool. Don't telegraph. Weatherly dropped his head and I was out of options. I brought my knee up, aiming for his crotch. I hit his thigh instead, and it was like kneeing a tree, but it gave me an opening. I pulled against the hand holding my hair, setting my scalp on fire, and swung for the moon with my left. I hit him hard in the side of the head. The blow didn't do much damage, but it did startle him. He took his arm away from me but held on to my hair. I swung again, a wild right that whistled through the air past his face. I could hear Jack's snort of disapproval in my mind. Waste of energy throwing useless punches. Knock it off, little girl. I'm not impressed with your little hissy fit. Just accept. He pulled me up by my hair until I was standing on my toes. I sucked a breath through my teeth, trying really hard not to scream at the pain. Not so tough now, are you? He dragged me backward toward the mattress. I think there's a better way of doing this. Giving you swinging room is dangerous. He pushed me down onto the mattress, following me, his big body covering mine, finally letting go of my hair. I hit him wherever I could, pounding his back, his shoulders. It was like punching stone. I wanted to scream, but he was crushing my chest with his, and getting air was getting harder. I brought my knee up again. This time I connected with something that brought a reaction from Weatherly. He grunted, his hand stopping in the middle of the act of tearing off my clothes. I tried again, but Weatherly reared back, slapping me across my mouth. I tasted blood, and for a horrible moment, everything went black. You know, I like a fighter, but this is ridiculous. You're being downgraded to collateral damage again. Weatherly fumbled at his belt, and the cold sharpness at my throat snapped me back to reality. I've been chasing these bastards long enough. They're the last of their clans, and I'm the last of mine. They've taken everything from me, my land, my clan, and left me out in the cold. I'm tired, and I'm tired of you. You're not worth making a mate. You'd be nothing but a thorn in my side. He slid the knife against my throat, and for an instant I wondered if he was joking or if this was just some weird sort of foreplay. But he pulled back, grinning, a terrible expression full of lust and hate, and so many clashing emotions that I had to look away. I tried to turn my head, and then I felt the warm rush of blood seeping from the place he'd cut me. There. Just lie there and die. He pushed off of me. I wanted to sit up, to scream, to do something, but a tiny part of my brain told me I was probably better off just being still, and for once I listened to that little voice. I reached up, almost tenderly touching my neck. When I pulled my hand away, there was blood, so much blood. Too much blood, it seemed. I closed my eyes, putting my hand over the cut, praying to every deity I could imagine to let me live to end this nightmare. The door crashed inward, and I opened my eyes, watching as it shattered into 1,000 rotten splinters. Behind it was Colt as wolf, followed by Jericho as human. Colt shook himself briefly, eyes locked on Weatherly. Weatherly still held the knife, and he rushed the wolf, bring the knife around in a big arc. It all looked like slow motion. His footing is off, wild punch won't connect. It didn't. Colt ducked easily, coming around, snapping at Weatherly's legs. He bit hard, teeth sinking into Weatherly's thigh. Blood ran down his dirty uniform, mixing with old blood and dirt. I took grim satisfaction that Weatherly was bleeding too, but I didn't have the energy to do much more than think about it. Jericho circled Colt and Weatherly, kneeling beside me. Weatherly's grunts and Colt's growls filling the air. Jericho met my eyes, and it was pretty clear from the look in them that what he saw frightened him. I smiled, or tried to sit up. Stay still. Jericho's voice was low. Just stay still. There was a crash behind Jericho, and I didn't stay still. I wanted to watch Colt, to know he was okay. Jericho sat down near my head. He'd torn off his t-shirt and held it to my neck. I wasn't sure if it was to stop the blood or keep from having to look at whatever damage Weatherly had inflicted. Weatherly was down on the floor, Colt standing on his chest. One massive front paw held down Weatherly's arm, now a bloody and torn appendage, but still clutching the knife. The other paw was on Weatherly's neck. I gave a silent cheer at the sight of it. Give it up, Weatherly. You're done for. Jericho's voice seemed far away. Really far. The room's perspective seemed stretched somehow. Blood loss, you're losing it, hold on. Fuck you. Fuck both of you. And your Hellcat. For being pinned by a wolf. The man had spunk. Colt growled, shoving his face into Weatherly's. I was pretty sure the growl was a returned fuck you. Then he lunged. Don't watch. Jericho reached down, covering my eyes. I closed them, not because he said so, but because it seemed easier this way, to just lie here and rest. Suddenly I was tired. Sleep, just go to sleep. There was a terrible crunching sound, and a gurgle that filled my ears. Then there was nothing, just the sound of my heart beating out its last rhythm. At least you met some cool guys. Had a good weekend. She's not going to last long. We can't take her back to the cabin. That was Jericho, my blonde Viking. There was a snuffle and a wet tongue licking my hand. I opened an eye, almost on the same level with Colt. He nudged me again, whining low in his throat. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I wished I'd met them under better circumstances. Maybe when I wake up. Colt, you gotta do it before it's too late. There was movement, someone lifting me, holding me upright. I opened my eyes to see Colt beside me. He nuzzled my face, his wet nose in my ear. I wanted to laugh because it tickled, but it seemed like a whole lot of work. So I tried to smile. I was cold, bone cold. I knew I was more or less sitting on Jericho's lap, that his arms were around me, but I couldn't feel anything. Not the warmth of his embrace or the solid presence of him behind me. Seemed like everything was growing colder around me, and I half expected to see my breath. But it was still summer. Colt's muzzle brushed against my neck. He whined again, a tentative sound. Do it now, Colt. There was a blinding flash of pain. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to scream, succeeding only in making a muffled groan. Then again, more pain, and Colt's body pressing me back against Jericho. What the hell were they doing to me? They were supposed to save me. Heat flooded through me, intense, almost unbearable. I could feel everything. Arms, legs, fingers, toes. In a way that I really didn't like. It was like being dumped head first into one of the steaming hot springs. I wanted out of my skin. Red? Hey, can you open your eyes? Look at me. I forced my eyes open, looking up at Jericho. Yeah, okay. The room was brighter now, things coming into focus. But there was a roaring in my head that made his words garbled, indistinct. Can you hear me? I nodded. Yes. His voice only made the roaring louder. I'm okay. Just don't talk right now. You're not okay. But we need to get you to our cabin. I'm going to pick you up now, okay? I really didn't have a say in that decision. I was lifted in the air, flying. I thought, even though I knew that was impossible, people didn't fly. But then we were out in the forest, the cool air a blessed relief against my feverish skin. Maybe I was dead. and an angel flying through the forest. Closed my eyes again, or they were still closed, I wasn't sure. I decided I'd completely lost it and that taking that nap now might be a good idea. I let go of reality and let myself go someplace else, someplace far away. The roaring faded and everything went silent and black. Chapter 6. Everything was silent. The roaring in my head was gone, replaced with a migraine. I could tell without opening my eyes that it was light outside. But eyes closed were fine for right now. I was in a bed, so that must mean I was in Jericho and Colt's cabin. Some snippet of conversation came back, something about bringing me here. After what? Oh geez. After Colt had killed Weatherly. After Weatherly had tried to kill me. And come damned close. I reached up, touching my neck. There was a bandage wrapped around my throat, a really big bandage. Weatherly must have done quite a number with his knife. I let my hand fall back onto the bed. Hey, you awake? I opened my eyes enough to look toward the voice, toward Colt. He stood in the doorway, hair pulled back in a low ponytail. I smiled. Yeah. My voice came out a weak little croak. I'm awake. He crossed the room and sat on the bed. You've been out for a few days. He took my hand, chafing my fingers in his. We're glad you're back with us. Me too. I tried to sit up, but my body didn't really want to cooperate. Here. You're going to be weak for a while. Colt helped me sit up, propping pillows behind me. Better. Yeah, better. A wave of vertigo sent my head spinning. I swallowed, my dry throat clicking. Can I have some water? Yeah, okay. Here. He poured a glass from a pitcher on the bedside table. Drink slow. Your throat's probably a little bruised. The water was cool, felt like heaven, but he was right. It reminded me of having my tonsils out as a kid. All the ice cream you want, except you can't swallow it. What happened? I handed him back the glass. Hey, you're awake. I looked past Colt at Jericho. He smiled, crossed the room and sat on the other side of the bed. Same thing, took my hand, held me as if I was made of fine china. She wants to know what happened. I wasn't that out of it that I didn't catch the glance between the guys. There was a long moment of weighted silence. Jericho finally blew out a sigh. Yeah, okay. It's complicated. I don't know what Weatherly told you. He said a lot of stuff about you guys, none of made much sense though. I got the feeling he thought you two had something he wanted. And then, the feel of the knife was back, the pressure, the non-pain of the cut. He wanted me, but then he didn't. I shrugged, at a loss to really explain anything else. Colt nodded. Weatherly's been after us for a long time. We live here on family land, Jericho's family, to be honest. The land that's not part of the park was raised on the other side of Black Wolf. The mountain's named after my clan. But shifters lead a very dangerous life. Even on land that's pretty inaccessible. Weatherly's from north of here. Long story short, clan rivalry. Clan betrayal. Jericho and I teamed up. Weatherly decided he'd rather be the proverbial lone wolf than join a clan that's not his. So he's was a shifter too? I was relieved that I used the right term. This time. Yeah, we're all that's left of 3 different clans. I think being alone took a toll on Weatherly, sent him off the deep end, into some dark place that he couldn't get out of. There was some really nasty stuff that happened in his clan near the end. It wasn't good from what we heard. What happened to your families? It hurt to talk, but there were questions I wanted answers to. You're the last of your clans? Jericho nodded. Yeah, we're it. We decided a long time ago that 2 against the world was better odds than going it alone. This land, my clan's land, never been part of the park. Goes back a long, long way in my family. Further than even Colt's claim to his lands. The deed's structured in a way that whoever occupies the cabin, as long as they can prove they're part of the family, owns the land. Someone was smart a long time ago. He gave me crooked smile. Smarter than the average wolf, I guess. Colt wasn't so lucky, though. Or Weatherly. My family's land ended up being taken over by the state. Eminent domain. Turned Black Wolf into a park. I still think of it as my land even though it's full of hikers and backpackers. Ruffles my fur to see them present. Company excluded. He squeezed my hand and smiled at me, and I squeezed back. Thanks for that. So he's been after you just because? Because he could, because he'd gone round the bend? Because he was jealous? Wanted something he thought was better than what he had? Who knows? Weatherly was just plain crazy, either from isolation or because he drove himself there on his own. The man was full of hate. Colt shifted on the bed so he was sitting beside me. I moved a little, sharing the pillows. Jericho took the cue and sat on the other side. Sandwiched between them, I felt safe and warm and less out of my body than I had. But something was still off. So Weatherly tried to kill me, right? With a knife. Yeah, Colt said. We got there too late. And saying we're sorry is never going to make that better. Jericho squeezed me hard enough to almost pull me over. We messed up big time. But we'll never do that again. You didn't get there too late. You got there in time or I wouldn't be here. Right. I touched my neck again. You saved me. From the silence between them, I knew there was more to the story. Colt was the first to say anything. About that, you're right, we saved you. It wasn't exactly what we'd planned, but it was the only way to save your life. Something inside of me clicked, words that Weatherly had said coming back to me. He said he was going to bite me. Bite me, mark me, make me his. Sounded like a demented chant. What did he mean? Red. Colt coughed, started again. Red, to make someone who isn't a shifter into one we bite them. Bite them while we're shifted. Does more than just make you one of us. It also can save someone. Like you. Save me? From Weatherly. No. Save you from dying. Weatherly cut your throat. You were bleeding to death when we got there. The only way to save you was to change you. I twisted around, ignoring protests from both of them. I faced Colt. You bit me? In that shack. I'd never had anyone look at me like Colt did. There was a hopelessness to that look, but there was something beneath that, a stubbornness that said he'd do it again given the chance, and a lift to his chin that dared me to challenge what he'd done. You saved my life. Not a question about it. No challenge to his actions. His face relaxed, his smile returning. I'm one of you now. A shifter. Yeah, I did. You are. I looked at Jericho. I'm part of his clan, right? Not yours. Does that change anything between us? Jericho shook his head and chuckled. I could see the look of surprise and relief on his face. That of all possible questions, that was my main one. It doesn't have to. I really don't mind. I just want to be with you. I don't care about anything else. He looked a little confused. You seem awfully calm for someone who's just been told she's been bitten by, mated to, and turned into a shifter. Most people, from what I've heard, tend to be a little more agitated. Maybe with that much information. I sat for a minute looking out the window. I could see trees and what I thought was probably the top of Black Wolf. It was nice, this room, this view. I could do worse. Red? You okay? I looked back at Colt and Jericho, the guys I'd met yesterday or the day before or the day before that. I wasn't sure when, really. My head hurt. Worse than any migraine I'd ever had. But I knew they'd risked their life for me, and they'd taken it on faith that doing what they did was the best thing for me. It seemed only logical that I'd take it on faith that it was the right thing. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm not like most girls. That got it. Laugh from Colt and a sound from Jericho that just made me shake my head. Could be that I'm a writer. I've written stuff that's stranger than fiction. Although this is right up there with strange. But I've thought about what other kinds of lives would be like. Obviously I thought they were all fictitious, just stuff I made up. This is like finding out the fairy tale is real. I sank back against the pillows. Exhaustion swept through me like a summer breeze. I yawned, a rather inelegant gesture, considering. I'm tired. Is that normal? Jericho slid out from beside me. Yeah, you did lose a lot of blood. And Colt's bite was on the aggressive side. Hey, I've never done this before. And it wasn't under ideal circumstances. He sat up, easing me back onto the pillows. I sank into them, breathing out a sigh. I could feel consciousness dissolving, sleep taking over. Just rest, Red. We'll be around checking on you. If you need anything, just let us know. How will you hear me? I closed my eyes. Hands tucked the blankets around me. Pulled the curtains and doused the bedside light. Red, we're wolves. We can hear you breathing. I smiled, imagining them sitting somewhere close by in the dark, counting my breaths, my heartbeats. For others it might seem creepy, but it put my mind and heart at ease, and I fell asleep knowing I was safe. Chapter 7. There were noises, crashing, things breaking. The scent of rotten wood. Splinters in my fingers. splinters in my neck, clawing to get them out, someone cutting them out with a knife. My dad used tweezers when I was a kid. Everything hurts, my neck, my body. I want Colt Jericho. I thought I was awake, or that I was dreaming. I screamed, and again, and then fell into something not really close to sleep, but further away from death than I had been. The next time I woke up, really woke up, it was dark. Someone was sitting in the chair in the corner, snoring softly. Jericho. Hey! He sat up, the chair creaking. How do you feel? Tired, but better. Not so wiped out though. My head is all fuzzy. Think I had a bad dream. You mumbled a lot, screamed sometimes. We've been taking turns sitting with you to wake you up. But you were really out of it. I nodded. Out of it was a pretty good description. Are you hungry? I sat up, adjusting the pillows. Jericho turned on the lamp beside his chair. There were dark circles under his eyes, and I wondered how long he'd been sitting there watching me sleep. No. I'm good. Maybe later. What time is it? Late. Not far off dawn, I think. I lost track of time. I do know you've been sleeping for the better part of 24 hours. I stretched, easing the kinks out of my shoulders and neck. You know how you feel when you go to the movies in the afternoon and it's dark when you come out? Kind of disoriented? I feel like that. Jericho laughed, stood up and crossed the room. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been off the mountain, but I know what you mean. Can you get Colt? I want to talk to you guys. Together. Yeah, sure. I sat in the dim light, listening to Jericho going downstairs, then outside, to his and Colt's voices. I could hear them from up here. The guys came in. And then there were footsteps on the stairs, louder as they came down the hall. Red. You okay? I could hear almost everything you said, even outside. Colt broke into a big grin. See? You are one of us now. I started shaking uncontrollably, my mind spinning. One of you? Thought that was all true? I thought I dreamed all of that stuff about being bitten, being changed. Jericho sat on the edge of the bed. It's true, all of it. Do you remember the rest of it? Weatherly. Yeah, I remember him, the knife, blood. I touched my neck. There was a bandage. Really just a big bandage, nothing like I thought I remembered. There had been something bigger around my neck. And Colt biting you? I stared at Colt. Yes, yes. You bit me after Weatherly tried to kill you with a knife. Jericho said the words so carefully, as if saying them again would actually hurt me. Tears welled up in my eyes. Yeah, he did. Then there was a lot of crashing. Colt broke down the door. Splinters. As a wolf. And you were there. I reached for Jericho's hand. But not as a wolf. No. I didn't shift in case we needed to get you back here. Which is what happened. You killed Weatherly. Colt was still standing in the doorway. I held out my hand and he crossed the room, dropping onto the bed beside me, taking my hand. Yeah, I killed Weatherly. His voice was low, almost inaudible. I've never killed anyone before. His hand trembled and I squeezed back. Thank you. You saved my life. He saved your life by biting you. By making you one of us. I glanced at Jericho. That's the part where I lost the thread. The part that I thought I dreamed. But that's true. It is. I bit you, it was the only way to save you. You'd lost so much blood. We thought we were too late. It was the only thing we could do. You can't know how hard it was, knowing that you didn't have a chance to decide yourself. That we decided your fate. But you saved my life. I can't be angry over that. I can be confused, and I am, but I can't be angry. Colt squeezed my hand, then slid his arm around me, pulling me against his chest. You're one of us now. Part of the clan. I let him hold me. Jericho rubbed the spot between my shoulders and we stayed like that, all wrapped up in each other until my mind started coming up with more questions. I pushed away from Colt. And I'm part of Colt's clan, right? I remember asking you this already, but I feel like I need to make sure that I understand. Colt nodded. Yes, that's right. I turned to Jericho. And you're sure we're okay? Just days ago these two men were complete strangers, and now it felt as though they were the most important people in my life. The thought of being away from them made me panic. Jericho nodded. His lips curved into a bright smile. You're a shifter. Wolf, right now that's all that matters. Your bloodline isn't pure anyway. Since you were created, not born to this. He shrugged. Frankly, the least of My worries is if Colt bit you or I did. The only thing I and he care about is that you're alive and in one place. Weatherly called it a what? A bite to make me his mating mark. And you're mine if you want to get technical. Colt leaned back, the sexy half-smile I love turning up the corner of his mouth. But I'm not one to get too hung up on technicalities. I punched Colt lightly on the shoulder. We sat for a long time watching the darkness outside, me hearing things I'd never heard before. I was getting sleepy again, a good kind of sleepy, not the zoned-out feeling I'd had before. But there were things that needed to be figured out, at least for me. I was changed, marked, a radically different girl than the one who had arrived to spend the weekend doing yoga. I was a completely different animal now, but I was an animal who didn't know where she belonged. Finally Colt gave words to the thoughts running around in my head like a caged squirrel. You're welcome to stay if you want. I want you to stay. I punched him harder this time. You said you don't use mind control. I don't. He rubbed his arm, winking. But I can read them. You don't know where to go, what to do. Stay here, think about it. Like Colt said, you're welcome here. For as long as you can stand us. Hopefully that's longer than just the rest of the weekend. Then the important thing finally surfaced. Maggie, what day is this? Sunday. Or it will be when the sun comes up. I'm supposed to go home today. If I don't, people will worry. My best friend, she will be frantic. I kicked aside the sheets, but there was too much masculinity holding them down. I need to call. Settle down. You shouldn't get up yet. Besides, it's not even light yet. Lay back, think about what you want to tell her. You've got time. Can I get cell reception up here? The thought of hiking to my car, then driving down that damned bumpy road to somewhere civilized seemed too exhausting to even contemplate. Plus there was my stuff, my gear, my tent. Whoa, slow down. Jericho set a hand on my shoulder, pushing me back against the pillows. One step at a time. First, what are you going to tell her? I'm going to tell her. What the hell was I going to tell her? That I decided to just up and move in with a couple guys I happen to have sex with? Oh, and by the way, I'm a wolf? I can't tell her the whole truth. You don't want others her to know about this, do you? There was a moment of silence. Even though I couldn't actually read their minds, it was pretty clear there was no debate on the answer to that question. A big fat no. Yeah, I thought so. No. So I won't tell Maggie the why. Wait. You've decided to stay. There was a little more than a hint of surprise in Jericho's voice. He sat up, turning to face me. Colt was in a similar state of shock apparently. I glanced at him, almost laughed at look on his face, but didn't have the heart. Did you really think I'd leave now? Red. You gotta admit this all happened to you so quickly. We don't expect you to stay, we want you to, but it's a lot to ask. Colt finished Jericho's sentence. But you did ask. And I accepted. I heard my voice speaking the words and wondered what I had just agreed to. It was totally off the wall, totally out of character for me, but then again, nothing about my former life seemed to fit anymore. I was a completely different person, half woman, half wolf. And I knew there was no possible way that I could return to life as it once was. This is where I belonged, with Colt and Jericho, between two wolves. There's nothing conventional about my life. I work from home, I write strange stories. I don't have any family. Not that no one would miss me, but still, can work from anywhere. As long as I have some kind of internet access at some point. There are ways to work around that. Hey, take a breath. Jericho reached over, putting his hand over my mouth. One thing at a time. You'll stay. I waited until he took his hand away. Yes. I want to stay. You don't know how happy that makes us, Red. Later today we'll take you out to the clearing. There's a place where I'm pretty sure you can make a call. Okay. All right. I'll tell her I met you, both of you, that right there should keep her occupied with questions for about a week or so. The guys laughed and I joined them. Felt good to laugh. Felt right. After that, I'll think of something. Chapter 9. Colt set me down on the soft ground beneath the pines. It was blessedly cool. And for a moment I just lay there, pain racking my body. It was too strong for me to fight, even if I wanted to. Something was changing inside me. Not just my body, but something deep inside my core. I wanted this, I wanted to change. I was afraid of the pain, but the desire to be a wolf was growing stronger than the fear. Colt. I tried to sit up, but I could only make it to my hands and knees. stayed there, head down, gulping in the night air. Jericho. We're here, Red. Right here. We're not leaving you. Will you change with me? We will. I looked up at Jericho, Colt standing behind him. Promise. Red, we wouldn't miss this for all the world. We'll be right there beside you every step. Some kind of seismic wave of pain took my breath away. I arched up onto my knees, head back, screaming my pain into the night sky. The sound went from human to wolf and this time stayed there. Jericho said something, Colt answered, but their voices were muddy, muffled, words making no sense. My hands hurt, the tips of my fingers felt like someone was cutting them open with knives. I made the mistake of looking down. My nails were splitting, the ends of my fingers widening, shortening, pulling back into my palms. Claws emerged, thick, sharp, wicked-looking. I wanted to scream, but frankly I was mesmerized. Thick hair appeared, reddish blonde, and within minutes my hands, my feet were covered. It moved up my arms and legs, and I looked down at my body. I was completely covered. There was more pain, more changes. My jaw cracked, stretching. It was agony, and I threw my hands up to my face, scratching my skin with my claws. The pain was nothing compared to the torture in the rest of my body. I tried to lower my arms, but they refused to cooperate, and I fell forward onto my newly formed paws. I wanted this to end, to be whatever I was supposed to be. There was another burst of noise in my head, the roar deafening now. Someone touched me and I turned, snarling, snapping my jaws and my very sharp new teeth at the hand on my shoulder. It was Colt. She's one of us. The roaring was gone. I could hear everything, see everything, smell things I could not identify. I was a wolf. Something pushed at my other shoulder. I turned, teeth bared. It was a yellow wolf. It was Jericho. It's okay. I shook my head. It sounded for a minute like radio static or bees buzzing. But then the noises cleared. The voice was his, in my mind, and he was there, standing next to me, a wolf. Think it and you can talk to me. You'll have to work at it. I wanted to tell him I was okay, or at least that I thought I was okay. But it was like being in a dream where you want to scream but it's all muffled. Like screaming into a pillow. A brief sharp pain lanced through my head and I whined in protest. It's okay. Just take it slow. You can understand me, right? Just wag your tail. Even as a wolf he could make me smile. If wolves could smile. And wag my tail, right? But there was something behind me, something I could control. I glanced over my shoulder. I did have a tail, a big lush tail, blonde-tipped in red. An experimental wiggle of my back end brought a yip from my left. Wag your tail, not wiggle your ass. As much as I liked that ass. I spun around. The big black wolf I'd seen on the trail in the park was sitting, head cocked, watching me with bright blue eyes. Colt. I snapped at him. You can wag your tail however you want. It was Jericho again, clearer this time. Screw you. Colt and Jericho barked what I assume was wolfish laughter. Good job, Red. You got it. Leave it to Colt to make you mad enough to talk. You feel like taking a walk in the woods? Jericho wagged his tail and turned. Follow the leader. I took a few experimental steps. For legs and a tail on a woman who had a hard time walking and chewing gum at the same time. But one step led to another, and within minutes I was loping down the path behind Jericho. Colt followed. I could hear him, every footfall on the pine needles. Clear and sharp. I could smell him too. And Jericho. Their scent was even more intoxicating, like this, mixed with trees and foliage and decaying leaves. Hit me like a physical blow someplace near my heart. These were my wolves. The path I'd walked on before was suddenly full of things I'd never seen or even knew existed. Everything was interesting. I heard something in the leaves and couldn't help pouncing on it. Turned out it was a shrew. I caught it, tossed it in the air. Then I backed away, my mouth filled with something that tasted horrible. Jericho's laugh echoed in my head. You'll learn what's edible, what's not. Those are not. I headed off the path, deeper into the forest. The guys flanked me, never pushing too close but always there. I snuffled through leaves, listened to earthworms burrowing, beetles moving invisibly under cover. All of it was fascinating. I moved through a clearing, a space beneath the pines. I stopped, taking it all in. It was like a cathedral, a sacred space, almost an hour. Backyard. I wanted to come here again as myself, or as my other self. Come on. You'll love the river. Colt veered off, heading down the ravine. I'd never been here, couldn't have. Ever walked here? It was steep and rocky, but I worked my way easily between boulders and fallen logs. If nothing else, I loved being graceful and sure-footed. The river shimmered in the dark, the surface giving off colors I never even knew existed, sounds I'd never heard with my human ears. I stood open mouthed with what I thought was probably a wolf-like grin on my face. Beautiful, right? Colt brushed against my shoulder, a bold move since I'd tried to bite him earlier. But the desire to snap had faded. Maybe I was getting used to being in this new skin. Yeah, beyond beautiful. More fun to play in. Come on. Colt nudged me with his nose, pushing me forward. But I didn't need any prodding. Race you. But I was already sprinting toward the river. I looked over my shoulder, my two wolves right behind me. I ran into the water. It was cold on my paws, but it ran off my fur. The rocks beneath me were slippery, but I clambered over them with ease. Water hit my muzzle and I turned. Colt jumped from a nearby rock, water splashing over me. I barked. I think it was something like a bark. It was a sound of perfect joy. We played in the water for a long time, jumping, splashing each other, veering off to turn over a rock in search of something hidden beneath them. Discovered a crayfish, nosing it with interest, until it clamped one claw on the end of my nose. I pulled back, snorting, shaking my head until it came loose, sailing through the air. I heard it hit the water with a little plunk. Colt crossed the river, and Jericho and I joined him. We started up the other side into the park. It was the first time I'd been here since I'd met Colt and Jericho at the hot springs. It seemed a lifetime away now. We skirted the campsites. The scent of burning wood was acrid, foreign, made me sneeze. Underneath that was the tantalizing smell of food. I lifted my head, sniffing the air, salivating. It was irresistible, and I turned, following the aroma. Jericho cut me off, a low growl rippling from his throat. I stopped. Colt stepped up on the other side. No. A single word spoken by both. My hackles rose. I wanted what I wanted. We can't risk being seen. I heard the words, let the meaning sink. I backed down, stepped away. It was hard, but I turned toward the river. The guys followed, and we went. Chapter 11. The sun was just coming up over the top of Black Wolf on the other side of the river, setting the trees on the other ridge alight. The leaves had changed. Almost overnight. Fall was here. There was a tang in the air, crispness like biting into an apple. I'd never been a fan of autumn. It had always seemed to me things ended in the fall. The garden my father had loved to potter around in on weekends was giving up its last tomatoes, the flowers fading, setting seed. And when I was a kid, it also meant back to school, the end of the summer. Fall always made me sad. But this year was different. It was a beginning. My heart did that thing I'd only read about in overwritten romance novels. It swelled with emotion. I'd never felt it before, and it took me a minute to realize what it was that I liked, how it felt, that I was comfortable with so many new emotions. And I realized something else. For the first time in a long, long time, I was truly happy. I wasn't really thrilled about being awake this early, though. I was more accustomed to going to bed at this time. But my schedule and the rest of the worlds had rarely meshed. And now it was even more obvious living here with my wolves. Jericho and Colt were sound asleep. I wanted to leave early, get done what I needed to do, and be back before dark. Some of my errands were purely chores. Getting the last of my things out of my apartment. Maggie had called, and the couple subletting my apartment wanted to move in a week early, willing to pay extra for most of the furniture that I no longer needed. What was left wasn't much, but it was all personal books and journals. Photos of my dad, the bear. Essentials, sentimental and otherwise. My clothes I brought up over a couple weekends. Everything else remaining with the sublet. And that included the artwork Harrison never liked. Colt and Jericho had made the transition into my new life with them a little easier. For one, they cleared the path down the mountain so I wasn't continually being hit in the face with branches and underbrush. They'd hacked out a parking space for my car too, so I could pull off the logging road that led back to the main road. I headed down the path. It felt really strange to be awake in the daylight. Seemed far brighter than I remembered for this time of the year. The shifter in me dug through my purse, fishing out sunglasses. The guys had told me there were things that took some getting used to, and I suppose this was one of them. The car was covered in leaves and pine needles, pretty well camouflaged against the undergrowth behind it. I brushed off the windshield, unlocked the car and got in. This was the first time I'd started it up in weeks. I crossed my fingers. It seemed to me that my dad had told me cars needed to run on a regular basis or they stopped working. I turned the key and the engine purred. Smiling, I managed to turn the car around on the narrow road, heading back toward the city. It was a very surreal experience speeding down the interstate. The fastest I'd moved lately had been at a sprint through the forest as a wolf, piloting a car at the limit, even though I'd done it thousands of times before my new life. I took the exit to my street, slowing down as my apartment came into view. Maggie's car was at the curb. My heart did a little jump at the thought of seeing her. I missed her more than I thought possible. We'd blithely assumed phone calls and text message would be enough. But the service in the mountains was a fickle mistress, and even though I could get a bar or two if I walked out to the edge of the clearing below the cabin, it wasn't reliable. Colt had been amazed there was any signal at all. Not that either he or Jericho had cell phones or computers. The light was out in the hallway like it always was. That was something I wouldn't miss. Conversations more like arguments with the super trying to get him to replace the bulb. No longer my problem. I took the stairs 2 at a time, since I'd started shifting on a regular basis and gotten over the whole being exhausted every time. I'd had more energy than ever. Back in my old life these stairs had seemed insurmountable. Now they were a piece of cake. Risha. The door to my apartment was open, Maggie leaning out into the hall. You made good time. I did. She pulled me into a big hug and I squeezed her back. She squeaked out a little sound and I backed off, forgetting for a minute she wasn't a wolf like me. You go away and turn into some muscle woman. You've lost weight. Don't those guys feed you? She dragged me into the apartment before I could pick a question to answer. There was food on the counter, bagels and cream cheese, fruit juice and coffee. Are you expecting company? I poured a cup of coffee and took a sip. Maggie stood, hands on hips, watching. Only you. All your favorites. And since when do you drink your coffee black? She nodded at the cream and sugar sitting on the counter. You're a sugar maven. Have been from the first cup you ever had. Guess my tastes have changed. How much else had changed? And how much of those changes could I talk to Maggie about? Well, even if you've given up cream and sugar, it's still great to see you. Maggie perched on one of the kitchen counter stools. I'd had them in storage. Harrison thought they were great. I tended to fall off of them during dinner. Maggie had brought them back out in her attempt to stage the apartment when she'd helped me find a sublet. Thanks for finding. What's their names? I took another sip of coffee. I really appreciate all your help. They're the Spaldings. Dina and David. Sounds like high school sweethearts our age, married for ages. Fell in love with the apartment as is. Down to the art on the walls. Maggie slid an envelope across the counter. Here's all their contact information, the signed agreement, and a copy of the lease. You're lucky there are only a couple months left on the lease. The Spaldings are looking to stay after the sublet is up, so hopefully that works out and they don't stiff you on the rent for the next couple months. I trust your judgment. You're pretty good at reading people. I spread a generous layer of cream cheese on a bagel. My stomach had been growling for the last half hour. I took a bite, but something was wrong. I love cream cheese and onion bagels. It tasted off wrong. I set the bagel aside. Not hungry. I ate before I left. I hated lying to Maggie, but there was no way I could tell her what I suspected, that the wolf in me wasn't a big fan of dairy. You okay? I glanced up at Maggie. She could read me like a book, knew me better than anyone. Well, except for Jericho and Colt. Yeah, just tired from the ride. But I could read her too, and I knew she wasn't buying it. Risha, come clean. What is it? Is it the guys? That little line appeared between her brows, the one that told me she was worried. I hated seeing it. No, yes. Sort of. But it's not what you think. It's nothing bad. I wasn't sure what to call it. How to tell her I wasn't the same person she thought I was. I've made some changes in my life, Maggie. Some really major changes. That's pretty obvious. You went away to clear your head and you ended up moving in with 2 guys. That's a pretty major change, especially for unconventional you. She gave me a smile, but the worry was still there in her eyes. Are you telling me there's more? It's a different kind of life, Maggie. Radically different. Pushed up the sleeves of my sweater, propping my chin up in my hands. I'm not sure I can explain it. Maggie reached out, touching my arm. Is there something you're not telling me? Yeah, there is. No. You're scratched and bruised. Her eyes were locked on my arms. I looked down, then pulled down my sleeves. Risha, are they doing that? Oh no. God no. Jericho and Colt would never hurt me. We do live in the wilderness, you know. Lots of hiking, bushwhacking, lots of me falling down. These are just sort of a daily occurrence. She still wasn't buying it. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Listen. Come. Up to the cabin. I want you to meet them and them to meet you. You're the most important person in my life. I want you to see that I'm okay up there. Really okay. After a minute she squeezed my hand. Okay. Deal. Before it snows I'll come up and meet your guys. She giggled. I still can't believe you ended up living with 2 guys. It's just so crazy. I winked. It is. But it's right for me. I was going to say sexy, but if you want to stick with crazy, that works. 2. Chapter 12. My last stop was the gym. There was nothing there for me to get, but I wanted to say goodbye to Jack. I felt like I owed him something, an explanation or thank you. He'd been in my life for only a short time, but it was his voice I heard most often. Could be that he reminded me of an older version of my dad. Or it could be he didn't take any of my shit, and I appreciated that. Hey Red. About time you show up. You missed some sessions. I leaned on the counter watching the guys in the ring. Jack came around, stood next to me. Yeah, about that. I need to cancel the rest of my contract. I'm moving. He looked down at me, and I swear the air between us changed. I thought he was going to yell or give me the silent treatment. But after a moment he broke into a smile. I had to admit it was the first time I'd ever seen Jack smile. He leaned forward and I tensed, expecting a smack to the back of my head. But instead he kissed my cheek. I wasn't sure which startled me more, the smile or the unexpected show of something resembling affection. About time you found your pack, Red, whoever they are. You'll fit in just fine. He stepped back. I stared. Had I just heard him say what I thought he'd said? You heard me. I stared harder. A ripple of energy rushing through my body, and I felt goosebumps crop up on my arms. I'd heard his words, but I swear his lips hadn't moved. He simply smiled and walked back behind the counter. Just let me get the cancellation form, and you're good to go. He shuffled papers. I watched, stunned, a million questions on the tip of my tongue, but I knew I couldn't ask them. I signed the form he pushed at me. Forwarding address? You might have a refund coming. I shook my head. Not really. I didn't think our road even had a name. Off the grid. I understand. Here. I scribbled Maggie's address. My friend. She'll see that I get it. He glanced at the paper. Works for me. Listen, Red. You take care of yourself. It's a different life, but if there's ever been anyone who can handle it, it's you. You're one of the toughest broads I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Someone in the ring called Jack's name. He nodded. I got a client waiting. Take care, Red. He smiled at me again, and then he was gone. I was back at the cabin just before sunset, which made the walk up the trail much easier. The boxes from my old apartment could wait until tomorrow, until Colt and Jericho could help me. My guys, my wolves. Even though I'd only been gone 12 hours, I missed them terribly. Missed their scent, the way they moved, looked, the way they looked at me, touched me. I was smiling long before I saw the cabin, before I saw Jericho and Colt sitting on the porch. They came down the stairs and I got the biggest bear hug, or I guess wolf hug would be the proper term. Whichever, it was just what I needed. Glad you're back. We missed you. Colt kissed me on one cheek, Jericho the other. The kisses might have been chaste, but their hands were making it clear they had something a lot less innocent in mind, and that suited me just fine. I missed you guys too. Where's your stuff? Do you want to bring it up? We cleared room in the loft. Boxes can wait. I pulled Colt close, kissing him hard, a big wet kiss with plenty of tongue. Before he could say anything, I did the same to Jericho, tugging his bottom lip, putting just enough pressure on him to remind him I'd bitten him before. But I can't. Whatever you want, Red. Inside or out? Colt spun me away from Jericho, pulling me into his arms. Out. And I know a place. I pushed away from Colt, skipping out of his grasp. I ran around the cabin, following the trail we'd taken the first night. I shifted. I wanted to be in that space with them. Colt caught me easily, grabbing me around the waist. I was laughing as he pulled me down onto the soft pine needles that carpeted the ground. Smelled cool and fresh, like Christmas warmed by the sun. I rolled onto my back, looking up at Colt, backed by the clear indigo of the coming twilight. Your eyes look silver at night, did you know that? And your eyes shine like diamonds. Isn't she the most beautiful thing in the world? Jericho dropped down onto the ground beside us. You're a beautiful woman and you make a beautiful wolf. My face went hot. You're making me blush. And it makes you all the prettier. Did we come out here to talk? Or did we come out here for something else? Turned out we were there for something else. I let the guys take the lead, my wolf content to bask in the attention and the love. It was darker, but I could still see if I wanted to if I kept my eyes open. But I closed them, seeing them in my mind's eye as they worshipped my body. They took turns moving over me, nuzzling and kissing, sucking my breasts, until my nipples were hard and aching. I arched against them, winding my fingers in their hair, holding them against me. Jericho broke away, moving slowly down my body, leaving a trail of fire on my skin with his kisses, his tongue, his sharp teeth brushing against the edge of my navel. He moved lower, and I gasped as those lips and tongue and sharp teeth brushed against something else, something far more sensitive. Hands spread my legs, but I was already letting them fall open. Fingers caressed the soft skin of the insides of my thighs, playing over my heated flesh. I grabbed at the pine needles beneath me, crushing them, the smell of pine filling the air. I wanted those fingers to move higher, to touch me at my core. But they only teased me, only fanned the fire they'd started. I could have begged them silently, just with my mind. I didn't. I let them play. A kiss softer than a butterfly's wing touched me, and I drew in a sharp breath. The kiss was followed by another, lips firmer pressing against me. Then the flick of a tongue at the edge, closer. But not there yet. The other stayed at my breast, sucking, stroking gently in time with the kisses between my legs. I shuddered slowly, my breathing unable to slow my heart. It bounded and leapt in time with the touch of the man between my thighs, with the one at my breast. And then there was more, kisses becoming deeper, the flick of a tongue, circling, testing, then suddenly plundering, probing, delving deeply into me. I sighed as pressed against the ground, fingers wound through thick hair, deeper and harder, licking and sucking at me until I couldn't stand it. Arched violently, digging my fingers into the earth, but didn't cry out, didn't scream my ecstasy to the sky. I kept it inside, kept the power contained, turning it inward. My wolf danced with me in sheer joy, feeling everything I did, loving every second of my pleasure. She wasn't controlled or contained, held back or held down. All was as it should be. I opened my eyes, watching the stars overhead, turning on the great wheel in the sky. I touched that wheel thanks to Colt and Jericho. I smiled, and my wolf did as well. She and I were one.